The iron cuffs had rubbed her wrists down to raw meat, but Marin had stopped feeling that hours ago. She kept her eyes on the boards beneath her bare feet. Splintered wood, old bloodstains gone brown, the shadows of buyers moving across them, back and forth, circling the platform, the way vultures circle a thing that is not quite dead yet. "Next lot," the auctioneer called, and his voice cut through the gray morning like the edge of a knife. He grabbed her jaw, turned her face up to the crowd, whether she wanted it or not. Female, 22 years, house broken, reads and writes. His fingers dug into her cheeks. Teeth are decent, all her limbs. A little thin, but she'll fatten up with regular feeding. Marin's face went hot with shame, but she did not pull away, because she had learned. Months ago in the slave camps, she had learned exactly what fighting bought a person. And it was never freedom. It was only more of the same, delivered harder. Her pack had fallen to raiders when the snows first came. The strong ones died screaming. The weak ones were sold before their tears had dried. And Marin fell somewhere in the middle, which meant she got to live. Which meant she got to stand here on this platform while strangers decided what she was worth. "Opening bid, 50 silver, the auctioneer announced. Silence. A long, ugly, breath-held silence. 50 silver might as well have been 50 gold. She could see the truth of it in the way their eyes slid off her. Too thin, too plain, too worn down by hunger to be worth the coin. 30. He tried, and something in his voice had already begun to sag. A few men drifted closer. They looked at her the way a farmer looks at a lame ox. Cold. Counting. She knew what lived behind those eyes. Kitchen drudge. Field hand. Something you used until it broke and then replaced. Her heart slammed against her ribs. But she made herself breathe slow. In. Out. Steady. She's trained as a healer, the auctioneer added, and now he was reaching grasping. Knows her herbs. Sets bones. Birthing work. Laughter rolled across the marketplace. "Who needs a healer when you've got claws and quick blood?" a man shouted. "Waste of good silver, that." 20, came a voice from the crowd. Low, gravelly, and Marin's blood turned to river water in winter. The man who stepped forward was broad through the shoulders and scarred across the face, and his teeth were the color of old bone. His eyes crawled over her top to bottom, and she read her whole future in the slow spread of his smile. Labor that broke the back. Beatings for the smallest wrong thing. A life measured out in bruises. 20 silver from Gareth, the auctioneer said, and the relief in his voice was almost worse than the silence had been. "Do I hear 25? Nothing." Gareth grinned, already counting his coins in his head. 15, he said, haggling, like she was a sack of grain going soft. "Look at her. Half dead already. Won't last the winter." "Sir," the auctioneer started. 15 or I walk." Marin shut her eyes, and she began to bargain with herself the way the desperate always do. Maybe if she worked hard. Maybe if she stayed quiet. Maybe if she never once gave him a reason, 100 gold. The voice came from the back of the crowd, and it did not shout. It did not need to. It fell over the marketplace like the first cold of true winter, the kind that gets into your bones and tells you without any words at all that everything is about to change. Conversations stopped mid-word. The laughter died in men's throats. A crying child went suddenly eerily silent. "The king," someone breathed. Marin's whole body knew before her mind caught up. Something in her, The wolf she'd thought was starved to death months ago pressed itself flat to the ground of her and whimpered. Every instinct she had screamed one word: down, down, make yourself small. Do not not be seen. Against every lesson survival had ever taught her, she looked up. The crowd was parting like water around a stone. And through that opening he came unhurried, certain the way. Only a man who has never once been made to wait moves through a room. He was tall, dark-haired with a face that looked cut from the mountain itself, all hard planes and harder edges. His clothes were fine, but plain. A man who could afford anything and needed to prove nothing. She had never laid eyes on him, and she knew him instantly. Everyone did. The conqueror of the northern reaches. The wolf who had built a kingdom on the bones of everyone who told him no. What could a man like that want with me? 100 gold, the auctioneer stammered. My lord, are you certain? Do you doubt your king's word? And that was all. 6 words, cold as river ice, and the auctioneer went white to the lips. Gareth's face had gone the color of ash. My lord, I had first claim. Golden eyes moved to him. Slow. Bored. You had nothing. A pause that lasted just long enough to hurt. Leave. Gareth ran. His swagger simply evaporated like breath on a cold morning. And then he was gone, shouldering through the crowd, like a man who had just remembered somewhere very important to be. The king stepped up onto the platform, and the whole wide marketplace shrank down to the space between them. This close, Maren could feel it rolling off him. Not just muscle, not just the size of him, though he was enormous. Something older. Something that made the animal part of her want to roll onto its back and show its throat. He looked at her, read her. She could not tell what he found. You're a healer. It was not a question quite, and still it caught her wrong-footed. Because of all the things a man like him might ask, of all the reasons he might have thrown away, 100 gold. Yes, my lord. Her voice came out a scrape of a whisper. The Moonbloom elders trained me. Herbs, setting bone, midwifery. And something small and stupid fluttered up in her chest. Hope. That worst of all the birds. Maybe this is why. Maybe he wants what I can do. Maybe he sees more than a body to use and throw away. Good, he said, and turned away. Corin! A warrior stepped forward. Huge, scarred his face, wiped clean of anything a person could read. Take her to the fortress. See she's fed and washed. He did not look back at her. He was already somewhere else in his mind, already done with her, and she felt the loss of his attention, like a door swinging shut. Wait! The word tore out of her before she could stop it. My lord, I can show you what I... A hand closed on her shoulder. Not cruel, but absolute. Rule 1. Corin's voice was low, and it carried the flat certainty of a man long used to being obeyed. You do not speak to the king unless he speaks to you first. His grip tightened just slightly. Rule 2. You never look him in the eye. Not ever. He turned her toward the road. Your property now, girl. Costly property, but property all the same. The words landed like a fist, and still some part of her caught on the only thing that mattered. At least I'm not dying in Gareth's fields. At least someone wanted the healing enough to pay for it. At least I'm alive. She let herself be led away, and at the very last, she stole one glance back at the king's retreating shoulders. He had saved her, maybe not from kindness, but saved her all the same. And if he wanted a healer, then she would be the finest healer he had ever seen. She had to be. It was the only thing she had left to bargain with. The road to the king's territory climbed and did not stop climbing. 3 days of it. Marin's feet, soft from months of chains, split open on the rocks and left small red prints on the stone behind her. Around her, the warriors moved like water, shifting from man to wolf and back again, as the trail demanded easy fluid, powerful in a way she could barely remember being. She could not recall the last time she had shifted. Starvation had driven her own wolf down so deep she could no longer feel her at all. A dead ember where a fire used to be. "Useless Omega," one warrior muttered, and his companions laughed. "King threw away good gold on that one." "Should have left her for the crows," said another. The words stung worse than her feet. She had heard filthier things in the camps, but these men served him. And if his own men thought her worthless, what did that say about the judgment of the man who'd bought her? "Maybe she's not for shifting," Corin said. Gruff, not quite kind, but not cruel either. And for one foolish moment, warmth flickered in her chest. Healers got other uses. Uses. The first warrior's laugh was an ugly thing. Healing's for weaklings too soft to bear their own pain. Real wolves mend themselves, or they die. He spat. "That's how you keep a pack strong." And Marin's stomach turned over. Because if this was how the king's own warriors thought about mending, then what in the world was she walking toward? On the 3rd day, her body simply stopped agreeing to hold her up. The world tilted. The gray sky swung down to meet the gray stone. And then she was on the ground, cheek in the dirt, the taste of it in her mouth, the mocking laughter ringing far away and underwater. Should have known she'd fold. Leave her. We've wasted enough daylight. She waited for the kick, for rough hands, for the ordinary everyday cruelty she had been taught to expect from the whole wide world. Instead, arms. Gentle arms, lifting her up off the ground like she weighed no more than a folded cloak. The scent hit her first. Pine and cold steel, and something underneath it. She had no name for something wild and low and old that made her sleeping wolf lift her head for the first time in months. Then she understood who was carrying her, and the breath went straight out of her lungs. The king held her against his chest as if she were nothing, as if she were something. His stride never broke on the treacherous path. She could feel the leashed power of him, the care he took to shift his grip so the stone wouldn't jar her. He said nothing. He did not answer the small broken apologies she breathed into his collar. He simply carried her up the mountain, and behind him, his warriors fell into a silence that had gone from mocking to something else entirely. Through half-shut eyes, she watched their destination rise up out of the mist. A fortress. Cut into the living mountain, all black stone and knife-edged angles. It did not look like a place where people lived. It looked like a blade someone had driven up into the belly of the sky, its towers reaching for the clouds like the fingers of a closing hand. This is it, she thought, as they passed beneath the raised teeth of the gate. And the courtyard beyond confirmed every fear she carried. Warriors drilled in hard, perfect rows. Snarls, the clash of steel on steel ringing off the walls. Even the children fought small faces twisted into scowls too old for them. Wooden swords cracking against wooden swords. No one smiled. No one laughed. The very air sat heavy on the shoulders, thick with violence, held back only by discipline. It was, Marin thought, the most joyless place she had ever stood in. The king set her down in the center of the courtyard. Careful even now. He raised a hand toward a stern-faced woman who came hurrying forward. But before the woman reached her, a voice slid out across the stone. "Welcome home, nephew." The words were smooth as poured honey, and they left frost in their wake. A warrior came toward them, so like the king that they might have been cast from the same mold, but older, and something had gone wrong in the making. Cruelty had settled into every line of his face the way water settles into cracked stone, freezing, splitting, widening the cracks a little more each winter. His pale eyes moved over Maren the way a man looks at meat that has begun to turn. "This is the healer you spent 100 gold on. It is Rogar." And there, Maren caught at a note in the king's voice she had not heard before. Not quite deference, but something careful, something that watched its own footing. Rogar's lip curled. "And you carried her in, through the gate, where the whole pack could see." The stern woman had Maren's arm, now tugging urgent, trying to pull her out of the blast radius of whatever was building between these two men. But Maren's feet dragged, and she could not stop her ears from catching what came next, low, but clear as a struck bell in the stone courtyard. "The pack watches everything you do, nephew. Every gesture, every soft moment. We cannot afford softness. Not now. Not after everything it cost us to become what we are." She couldn't walk. She was weak. Rogar cut him clean off, and now every wolf in this yard has watched their king cradle weakness against his heart. What do you imagine our enemies will make of that when word travels? And word always travels. The woman got Maren moving at last, half dragging her toward the black mouth of the fortress door. "That was Rogar," she whispered fast and low. "The pack's beta, the king's own uncle." Her fingers dug in. "If you value the breath in your body, girl, you will pray that man forgets your face." And as the shadow of the doorway swallowed them, Maren could still hear the two of them behind her. Uncle and nephew. Voices pitched low and tight and old, the sound of an argument worn smooth by 1,000 repetitions. She did not yet understand what she had walked into, but she was beginning to. 3 weeks passed, and Maren learned the hard rhythms of the fortress, the way you learn to walk on ice. Carefully, and always braced to fall. Dawn brought the clash of the training yards. Midday, the servants moving through the stone halls like quiet water, keeping the great cold machine of the place running. Evening brought the fighters limping home nursing wounds that a single touch of her hands could have closed in minutes. But no one asked. No one ever asked. She scrubbed floors. She tended fires. And she was moon help her grateful. Grateful for the steady meals, the warm corner to sleep in. No hand had been raised to her once, and she had almost forgotten that such a thing was possible. Still, watching the daily suffering wore at her like water on stone. She saw a young warrior struggling to lift his sword arm, the shoulder clearly wrenched from its socket. She came toward him with her hands already warming, the old familiar heat rising in her palms. "Get away from me." He shrank back against the wall, like she'd offered him a snake. "I don't want your Omega weakness. But I could help." He said it like a curse. Real wolves heal themselves, or they die trying. That's what makes us strong. The scene drew a crowd. Warriors gathered to watch, their faces bent with disgust, as if she'd done something obscene right there in the open yard. A senior fighter shoved through them, his scarred face like a coming storm. "What's this Omega doing with trying to soften one of ours with her healing nonsense?" "Healing's for the weak." The senior man's eyes narrowed on her, and his voice dropped low and flat. "You were bought as a servant, not a healer. Remember your place, Omega." Shame scalded her cheeks as she backed away. But underneath the shame hotter was confusion. If he bought me as a servant, why ask about the healing at all? Why throw away 100 gold for someone to scrub his floors? The pattern repeated, over and over in the days that followed. A kitchen maid scalded her hand on a pot. Maren offered, and was scolded for encouraging clumsiness. A guard let a cut go green and rotten rather than admit it hurt. Her suggestion earned her a lecture on how true wolves did not coddle small wounds. Each refusal chipped a little more off the foolish hope she'd carried up the mountain. Maybe I misheard him. Maybe he only asked to be sure of what he was buying, not because he ever meant to use it. But then, why carry me? Why the gentleness? Why any of it? For a girl meant only to scrub stone, the question ate at her until she could not hold it any more. Her chance came one evening, in the great hall on her knees, with a scrub brush when the king himself came striding through with a knot of advisors talk of patrol routes, supply lines, the cold business of holding a kingdom together. His voice carried that same winter authority she remembered from the platform. But there was something else in it now. Underneath, a tiredness that reached into her chest and squeezed, and she could not have said why. This is it. I have to know. My lord, she said, soft, rising the wet rag twisted in her fists. The hall went dead. Every advisor turned to stare. Shock. Then outrage blooming across their faces, one after another. The king's golden eyes flicked to her, just for a breath, then away, as if she were beneath the trouble of seeing. My lord, I only wanted to ask, how dare you? One advisor stepped forward, his face gone red. A servant does not address the king. But I'm a healer. Desperation pitched her voice too high. He bought me as a healer, surely he wants me to. You are nothing. The man snarled it. You speak when you are spoken to, not before. Corin came from nowhere. His hand landed on her shoulder hard enough to bruise. My apologies, my king. The Omega forgets herself. Says he that she doesn't again. The king never even slowed. He walked on through the hall as if she had never existed at all. Maren's heart went down like a stone in deep water as Corin steered her out his low lecture on proper conduct, washing over her without landing. Frustration built in her chest until her breath came short. If I'm not meant to heal, why won't a single one of them just say so? Why this cruel game where my hands are supposed to matter, and clearly, they don't. But the next morning, everything cracked open. She was sweeping the training yard when she heard it, the wet, wrong crack of a bone breaking the way bones are not meant to break. A boy, no more than 12. He'd come down badly from an aerial drill, and his leg lay beneath him at an angle that made her whole body go cold. He tried to rise, fell, cried out a high, thin sound that reached into her chest and took hold. Around the yard, the warriors watched with cold, folded arms. This was their way. Pain built character. Suffering forged strength. And then Rogar crossed the yard. His pale eyes were bright with a satisfaction that turned Maren's stomach. He crouched by the boy, took hold of the broken arm, the unbroken arm, and twisted until a second bone gave way with a crack. Pathetic, he said almost gently to the whole watching yard. This is what weakness looks like. Another twist. The boy shrieked. And this is what we burn out of the strong. Something in Maren tore loose. She did not think. She did not weigh the cost, or count the rules, or hear the voice of survival, telling her to keep her eyes down and her hands still. She simply moved. Stop. The word ripped out of her as she dropped to her knees beside the child. Her hands were already blazing, the heat pouring out of her palms and down into his ruined body. Bone drew back toward bone. Torn muscle wove itself whole. His leg straightened, the terrible angle correcting itself under her hands, with a gentleness the yard had never once shown him. The boy stared at her. His sobs stuttered into a stunned, confused quiet, as if kindness were a language he had heard about once long ago and never thought to learn. "What is this?" Rogar's voice fell across the silence like a blade. Maren looked up. He loomed over her, his face working with rage. And behind him, coming across the yard with slow, measured steps, was the king. "Your Omega pet defies our ways." Rogar spat the words venom on every one. "She healed the very weakness we were carving out of him. She must be punished." The king stopped beside them. His golden eyes moved over the scene. The boy sitting up now, leg whole, testing it in disbelief. And Maren still kneeling, her hands still glowing faint with the last of it. Any Omega with sense would have folded, would have pressed her face to the stone, and begged and sworn never, never again. Maren lifted her chin, and she met the king's eyes. Full on, silent. "Go on then. Punish me for mercy. I dare you." His nostrils flared. He read the defiance in her face the way he read everything, quickly, completely. And for one held heartbeat, the air between them crackled like the sky before lightning. Then he looked away. "The boy is more used to me healed," he said. Flat, simple. "He returns to training the sooner." Rogar's fist slammed into the wall. "Nephew, enough." And the king's voice this time carried the full weight of him. Every warrior in the yard flinched as one. The word pressed down on the stone like a hand. "Do not question me again." As guards moved to walk Maren back toward the fortress, she felt Rogar's hatred burning into her spine like a brand pressed to bare skin. But it was not his face that stayed with her. It was the king's. That single instant, when the cold mask had slipped just a hair, just a crack, and shown her something underneath that she had no name for yet. Something that had looked for half a heartbeat, almost like gratitude. And as the shadow of the doorway closed over her once more, Maren understood one thing clearly, the way you understand a change in the weather. She had not walked into a simple story of a cruel king and his cruel pack. She had walked into a war, one being fought inside a single man. Between everything he had been taught to be and something else buried deep that had looked at her across a courtyard of broken things, and had not wanted her to stop. The summons came 3 days after the courtyard. A guard she didn't know, standing in her doorway, with his face wiped clean of anything she could read. "You're to come with me." "Where?" Maren asked, and her voice came out steadier than her hands. "The king wants a word." Her heart stopped, then started again, hammering so hard against her ribs she was certain the guard could hear it through the stone quiet hall. "The king wants to see me. Alone. Which means either he has work for me at last, or I'm in trouble. Which, yes, that. Probably that." The guard led her up through corridors she had never walked. Deeper into the fortress, higher, where the air grew warmer, and the torches burned brighter, and the stone itself seemed to soften into something almost like a home. Her bare feet whispered against the floor. Winding stairs, a landing. And then a pair of oak doors, taller than 2 men, black with age and iron-bound. He knocked. "Enter." The doors swung in, and the room beyond took the breath right out of her. Warmth, real warmth. A fire, the size of a hearth, built to roast a whole deer, throwing gold light across rich hangings on the walls. It was comfortable in a way nothing else in this entire cold mountain was comfortable. A private place. A place a man went to stop being a king for a few hours. And there, dark against the fire, stood the man himself. He'd shed the formal clothes for something plain and dark, and somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. The flames threw moving shadows across the hard line of his jaw. He turned, and his golden eyes found hers, and she remembered herself just in time. Dropped her gaze to the floor, to her own bare feet, to anything that was not his face. "You may leave us," he told the guard. The door clicked shut, and they were alone. Maren kept her eyes down, hyper-aware of every breath, every pop of the fire, every foot of air between them. The silence stretched until it grew a texture, until she could not bear the weight of it 1 second longer. "You wanted to see me, my lord." "I did." His voice was quieter than she had ever heard it, but the authority never left it, not for a moment. "About the courtyard." Her stomach clenched. "My lord, You healed him well." He interrupted, and she heard him move closer, the firelight shifting. "The boy trains again tomorrow." Relief flooded her quick and bright. And right behind it, confusion. If he isn't angry, then why does he sound so far away? "Thank you, my lord. I only wanted to help. But this is not our way." And there it was. The tone went hard, sliding back into the cold voice from the platform, from the market. "Here we earn our strength through pain. A warrior who fights through his wound proves his worth. You robbed him of that. You dishonored him." The words landed like a slap. "My lord, I don't understand. You defended me. I defended the outcome." He was near enough now that she could feel the heat of him catch that scent of pine and steel and the wild thing beneath. A healed warrior returns to his duty faster. That is all. It does not mean I approve of how. Maren's hands curled into fists at her sides. Every instinct she owned screamed at her to bow, to agree, to swallow it whole. He was the king. His word was law and stone and the shape of the world. But something in his voice would not line up with his words. Something that sat underneath them, like a stone under still water. Something that sounded almost like a man arguing with himself. She lifted her head, and she looked at him. "I understand it's not your way, my lord." Carefully, each word set down like a foot on ice. "But surely there is no honor in suffering that serves nothing. You lose warriors to wounds that could close in an hour. How is that strength? How is that anything but waste?" His jaw tightened, and something raw crossed his face there, and gone quick as a fish under water. Pain, maybe, or an anger so old it had gone quiet. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped low and heavy, and full of a thing she had not expected: memory. "When I was a boy," he said, "my pack was slaughtered." The words fell into the warm room like stones into a still pond. We were open, trusting. We believed in mercy, in helping the stranger at the gate, in showing kindness as if it were a kind of strength. His golden eyes burned down into hers. It made us soft. It made us slow. And when the killers came in the dark, we fell like wheat before the blade. All of us. Every face I knew. Maren's breath caught in her throat, because she could see it. A boy, watching his whole world burn, learning in one endless night that kindness was the thing that got you killed. "My uncle pulled me out of the fire," he went on, and his voice hardened around the word. "Rogar, him and a handful of others. We swore an oath over the ashes, that we would never be soft again, never show a wound an enemy could reach into. We would be strong, Always. No matter the cost. He stepped closer. The whole room seemed to bend toward him. Is that understood? The weight of him pressed down on her alpha to omega, demanding she fold. And under the command, she heard it was the echo of that frightened boy, still standing in the ashes, still certain. The fire would come again if he let his guard down for even a breath. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, and her heart broke for him, even as it broke for her. He studied her a long moment, and she watched something shift behind his eyes, a flicker of something like regret, like a man setting down a burden he did not want to be seen setting down. "We will use your gift only in true emergencies," he said at last, and the words seemed to cost him. "When a life hangs by a thread, not for the small hurts that mend on their own." Hope flared in her chest, despite everything. It wasn't what she'd dreamed on the mountain, but it was a door left open a crack. A chance to do the one thing she was made to do, even if only rarely. "Thank you, my lord." She dropped into a deep bow. "I understand." She turned for the door, her mind already running ahead. Maren. Her name. In his voice. It stopped her cold. She turned back suddenly, painfully aware of all of it. The fire, the closed door, the smallness of the space, the careful walls of him showing for once their hairline cracks. "Yes, my lord?" "Stay clear of my uncle." The warning was quiet and serious. "Rogar does not share my view of your usefulness. It would be wise to keep out of his path." "Oh," she said, and for a reason she could not name, and did not want to look at too closely, the thought disappointed her more than it should have. "Yes, my lord, I understand." She curtsied again, and she fled before she could say something foolish, before the warmth of the room could loosen something in her chest that had no business loosening. Her cheeks burned the whole way down the dark stairs. He learned that kindness kills, she thought. He was a child, and the world taught him that the softest thing in a person is the thing that gets them killed. And now I have to teach a king to unlearn it. Moon help me. For a while, she honored the bargain. When she saw a wound that would mend on its own, she made herself look away. When warriors limped past, her jaws set against the pain, she kept her glowing hands clasped behind her back and her mouth shut. Until the morning, a young she-wolf came down wrong from an aerial drill. Maren heard the leg break before she saw it. And when she turned, she saw the bone through the skin, and the blood already pooling black on the packed dirt, and the girl writhing and white-faced, and going into the shock that comes just before a body decides to quit. This is it. This is exactly what he meant, a life by a thread. She did not hesitate. Her hands were blazing before her knees hit the ground. She poured herself into the ruined leg, bone drawing, straight muscle, knitting, skin, sealing, without so much as a scar. The girl's screams softened to whimpers, then to a stunned, staring silence, as she looked down at a leg that had a moment ago been trying to kill her. "How dare you?" Rogar's voice cracked across the yard like a whip. Maren looked up to find him stalking toward her pale eyes, bright and terrible. "This Omega defies our ways again." He flung it to the gathered crowd, playing to them. "She rots our warriors from the inside with her weakness." But even as he raged, Maren's eye caught something on the balcony above. The king, watching. Their eyes met just for a breath. And what she saw there was not anger. It was not even the careful neutrality he'd worn in the courtyard. It was something warmer. Something that had nothing to do with a warrior returning to duty faster, and everything to do with pride. He was glad, and the truth of it struck her like lightning splitting a tree. He said all those things, about their ways, about pain and strength, and never being soft again. And he doesn't believe a word of it anymore. The war isn't between and this pack. The war is inside him. Between what a frightened boy was taught and what the man has started to feel. And I am not the only one changing. A week later, the fortress woke to thunder. Not weather. Boots. Hundreds of them ringing on stone in the cold blue before dawn. Maren joined the servants, crowding the battlements, and looked down into a courtyard filled edge to edge with warriors. Some in human form, armored and gleaming. Others already shifted great beasts, with eyes like banked coals, breath smoking in the mountain chill. "What's happening?" she asked the maid beside her. The girl gave her a look of pure disbelief. "You haven't heard the king rides to war today." At the head of them all sat the king on a black war horse, his dark armor fitted to him like a second skin. His voice carried up the stone as he spoke to his warriors of honor and strength, and the enemy at the eastern border. They answered him with a roar that shook dust from the battlements, howls rising into the dark like a single throat. Maren watched until the last of them had vanished down the mountain road, and her heart sat heavy in her chest with a feeling she did not have the courage to name. He's gone. For weeks, maybe. And I should be relieved. No cold golden eyes tracking me across the hall. No careful walls to bruise myself against. So why does it feel like the fire went out of the whole mountain when he left? Here is the strange thing. The thing she would remember for the rest of her life. With the king gone, with the great weight of his presence lifted off the fortress, something began to grow in the cracks. Something green. Something no one had planted. It began with a kitchen maid. The girl came to Maren 3 days in cradling a hand scalded red and blistering, glancing over her shoulder the whole way. "Please," she whispered. "It hurts so bad, and cook says if I can't work, I'm turned out. Please." Maren healed it, and she watched the relief break across the girl's face like sunrise. And word spread. Quiet. Passed hand to hand in the servants' quarters, in the low voices of people who had learned long ago to keep their needs to themselves. The Omega can help. And she will. A stable boy with a hoof-cracked shin. A seamstress with fingers pricked raw from rushed night work. A guard with a cut going green at the edges who came to her in the dark and made her swear not to tell. None of them emergencies. Not one. But how could she turn them away when they asked her like that, when they came to her? The way you come to the last lit window on a long, dark road. And here was the thing she had not expected. The thing that undid her. The servants began to smile. Laughter. Actual. Laughter drifted through the stone halls for the first time. Children who had huddled in the corners now chased each other across the courtyards, their shrieks bouncing off walls that had heard nothing but shouted orders in longer than anyone could remember. The change spread like water, finding its level. Warriors who had watched her heal began, without a word, to soften their own hard hands. A trainer who once kicked a fallen recruit now reached down and pulled him up. Music one evening from the great hall. Quiet talk in the gardens. The fortress itself seemed to let out a breath it had been holding for 20 years. Maren moved through all of it with a lightness she had not felt since before the raiders came. Useful, needed, seen. And Corin. Corin of all people. The man who had gripped her shoulder in the marketplace and told her she was property. He fell into step beside her one evening in the corridor, gruff and low. "My brother," he said, not looking at her. The cut on his side, Last winter. Went bad. You were the one closed it. I remember. He'd have died. A pause. His jaw worked. So, anyone gives you trouble while the king's away. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. He just walked on ahead of her. And from that day, no one in the servants' quarters so much as raised their voice to her. An unexpected ally, she thought, watching his broad back move down the hall. In this, of all places. Which just goes to show you never know which of the hard ones is only hard, because no one ever showed them another way. But always underneath the warmth, one cold question waited. What will he think when he comes home? Will he see the joy, or only the weakness his uncle warned him about, spread now through every corner of his kingdom, with my hands all over it? The answer came 3 weeks later. In the dead of night, Maren woke to horns, not the triumphant call of a victory returning home. These were high and broken and desperate, the sound of an emergency clawing its way up the mountain. She threw a cloak over her shift and ran. The courtyard was filling with torchlight and frightened faces by the time she reached it. And through the gates came 3 riders, their wolves lathered white with sweat and foam, staggering on their feet. The king led them. His armor was dented and dark with blood, and his golden eyes were wild in a way she had never seen the eyes of a man running out of time. "Where is she?" he roared, and his voice cracked across the courtyard. "Where is the healer?" "Here." Maren shoved through the crowd. "I'm here, my lord." The relief that broke over his face nearly took her legs out from under her. This close, she could see the exhaustion carved into him, the way his hands shook where they gripped the reins. "My uncle," he said, and his voice was rough as broken stone. "Silver blades. Poisoned. His wolf can't fight it alone, and he won't survive the ride back." "How far?" she asked, already knowing the answer would be too far. 2 hours hard run. You ride with me, I'll shift and carry you." She nodded, then hesitated. "My lord, I can shift too. I'm fast. I can keep your pace." Something crossed his face, surprise, and underneath it, she was almost sure approval. His change was a magnificent, terrible thing to stand near. Bone-cracking and reshaping. Muscle-filling like poured water. And where the man had stood a wolf the size of a small horse crouched black against the torchlight, golden eyes fixed on her. Her own shift came harder. Months of starvation had left her wolf weak and slow to answer. But desperation is its own kind of strength, and it lent her enough, and then a smaller silver wolf stood shivering beside the great black one. The run was brutal. He set a killing pace, powerful legs eating the dark ground, and she threw everything she had into staying at his flank. Her lungs burned, her legs screamed. The forest tore past in streaks of black and gray. But she kept up. She had to keep up. A man's life was running out ahead of her in the dark. They found the camp beside a stream just where he'd said. A ring of grim-faced warriors standing guard over a still form on a bed of pine boughs. Rogar. He lay motionless, his breath so shallow it barely stirred the air. Gray had crept up under his skin like frost climbing a windowpane. Maren shifted back to human without a thought for her own bareness, the urgency burning everything else away. The king shifted beside her, and even now, even in this, the first thing his hands did was drag his long campaign cloak from his shoulders and settle it around hers before he led her to his uncle's side. She knelt, and she looked down at the face of the man who had promised with his pale eyes to see her dead. "I don't know if I can save him," she whispered. Her hands were already glowing. The wounds beneath were worse than anything she had ever touched, the silver poison eating outward black threads, spreading through the flesh. "Try," the king said. "Just that." And he settled beside her for what they both knew would be a long night. The healing took hours. She poured herself into the broken body of the man who hated her. She fought the silver drop by drop, coaxing it out, chasing it through the blood, closing torn flesh, a thread at a time. And through all of it, the king stayed. A steady weight beside her in the dark. An anchor she did not know she'd been reaching for, until she felt it there. When she finally sagged spent to the bone, Rogar's breathing had steadied. The gray had drained from his skin. The poison was gone. The wound sealed life running strong and stubborn through his veins once more. "You did it," the king whispered. His voice was rough with something that was not quite relief. His hand found hers in the dark. Squeezed, just once, and for a moment they simply sat there in the gray light before dawn. Her small cold hand swallowed in his large warm one, both of them trembling with exhaustion and the enormity of what she'd just pulled back from the edge. Then Rogar's eyes opened, and the moment shattered like ice underfoot. The beta took in the scene, his own healed body, her glowing hands. The king crouched close and protective at her side, and his face slowly, horribly understood. "What?" he rasped, struggling up onto his elbows. "What have you done to me?" "She saved your life," the king said, and his voice had gone carefully, dangerously even. "You should have let me die." Rogar's voice cracked with fury. My death would have lit a fire under our warriors, fed their rage for the final push." His pale eyes swung to Maren, and the hatred in them was a living, breathing thing. "Instead, you've made us all soft with this Omega's tainted mercy." The king went very still. "You're telling me I should have let you die, for the sake of an army's anger?" "Yes." Rogar dragged himself upright, swaying. "That is what strength looks like. That is what leadership is." The king was quiet, a long moment. His golden eyes moved over his uncle's face, the face of the man who had pulled him from the fire all those years ago, who had taught him every hard thing he knew. "I see," he said finally. "Soft. Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I've grown too soft." He glanced at Maren, and she saw the apology buried in it, quick and hidden. "Return to the fortress, healer. We'll speak of this when you've recovered." "My lord," she started. He shook his head. "Go, gentler. I need to speak with my uncle. Alone." She gathered the cloak around herself and rose on legs that barely held her. And as she turned to shift for the long run home, she caught Rogar watching her. His pale eyes burned with a hatred so pure it stopped the breath in her chest. Not the ordinary cruelty she'd braced for since the marketplace. Something worse. The hatred of a true believer who has just watched the thing he despises reach into his own body and pull him back from the death he'd wanted. "This isn't over," those eyes said. "You saved my life, and for that I will end yours." Because in the twisted country of Rogar's mind, her healing was not a gift. It was a rot, a softness, a corruption spreading through everything he had spent his whole ruined life trying to protect. And a man like that, a man who would rather die than be saved by mercy, will always in the end come for the one who showed it to him. Maren shifted, and she ran for home through the dark, the king's scent still warm in the cloak around her shoulders. But the whole way down the mountain, she could feel those pale eyes on her back, waiting. The fortress changed again when the king came home. Not all at once. It was subtler than that. The lightness that had grown in his absence did not vanish. It only pulled back the way a wild thing pulls back into the tree line when a hunter walks into the clearing. It waited. It watched. And Rogar walked the halls like a wound that would not close. I was healed. His body was whole, his color good, his strength returned. Maren had given all of that with her own 2 hands. And he moved through the stone corridors carrying his hatred of her like a lamp he refused to set down. Its pale light seeking out any small softness he could crush. Still people came to her. They came more carefully now. A glance over the shoulder first. A quick low word in a doorway. But they came. A servant with a twisted ankle. A guard with a wound gone sour. A kitchen girl whose hands shook too badly to hold a knife. She helped them all, but the joy had gone thin. Where there had been open gratitude, now there was only furtive relief and the constant nervous checking of the corridor behind them. And the king did not speak to her. Nearly a month passed. A month. And in all that time, the man who had carried her up a mountain, who had sat vigil beside her through a night that nearly killed them both, who had held her hand in the gray dawn light and said, "You did it." Did it. That man looked straight through her, as if she were made of the same cold stone as the walls. She caught glimpses. Crossing the yard with his advisors. Bent over reports in the great hall. In the training ground, his blade a silver blur. But his golden eyes never once found her. Never once landed. As if that moment by the stream had been something she'd dreamed. But I didn't dream it. I know I didn't. I can still feel his hand around mine. So why won't he look at me? Did I do something? Did his uncle poison him against me while I ran home in the dark? Or is it simpler than that? Is it that a king can afford to be soft on a mountainside at midnight, and cannot afford it at all in the light of his own hall? She turned it over every night until her head ached with it. And she came to the worst conclusion a heart can come to. He's ashamed of me, of that night, of what he let me see in him. She replayed it anyway. She couldn't stop. The desperate ride, the way he'd matched her stride, and never once complained that a starved little Omega was keeping pace. The hours of vigil, and most of all the cloak he'd pulled from his own shoulders in the middle of a crisis and settled around her careful and respectful, because a girl was cold. The weight of that cloak had been nothing, and the weight of what it meant had been everything. I'm in love with him. The thought arrived one evening, fully formed, as she watched him across the great hall in low talk with his captains. And it landed on her like a beam falling from a burning roof. Oh no. No, no, no. Absolutely not. He is a king, and I am a thing he bought for 100 gold at a market next to the livestock and the grain. This is the single most foolish thing my foolish heart has ever done, and it has done some foolish things, and it doesn't care. Not even a little. Look at it. Just pounding away in there like a bird that never learned what a cage was. She fled the hall before she could do something unforgivable. Like meet his eyes. Like let him see. The knock came long after the fortress had gone to sleep. Maren opened her door to find Rogar in the corridor, his pale eyes catching the torchlight and throwing it back cold. The king wants to see you. Her heart leapt, and then in the same breath fell, because something in his voice was wrong. Too smooth, too still, even for a man who despised her. Now, my lord, it's very late. Now. He was already turning away. Follow me. They walked through corridors she had never seen, and then down. Stone steps that grew damper and colder with each turning the torches farther apart, the dark pressing in between them. The dungeons. The understanding crawled up her spine like meltwater. Why would the king be in the dungeons at this hour? Is there a prisoner who needs healing? She asked. And she kept her voice level only by an act of pure will. Rogar didn't answer. They came out into a round stone chamber ringed with empty cells. Several guards waited in the shadows, their faces hidden behind iron. No prisoner, no injured man, no fire, no king. Maren stopped in the center of the room, and she turned slowly to face the beta. Where is the king? His smile opened across his face like a blade coming out of its sheath. He isn't coming. The cold that went through her then had nothing to do with the dungeon air. The guards shifted. Closer. Their hands drifted toward their weapons, and Maren understood with the clarity that comes only at the very end of things that she had walked down here on her own 2 feet, and into a trap that had been waiting for her since the night she'd saved this man's life. You're going to disappear tonight, Rogar said, conversational, almost gentle. A tragic accident, or perhaps you simply wandered off, deserted your post. These things happen. With slaves. Please. She backed toward the wall, and the stone was cold and final against her spine. I've done nothing wrong. I only ever wanted to help. Help? And now his voice cracked, the calm splitting to show the madness underneath. You call this rot help? You've made them weak, dependent, soft. You are poison girl. You are the rot that eats a kingdom from the inside, and I have watched it spread with your fingerprints all over it. She saw it now, plain in his eyes. Not simple cruelty. Faith. The absolute fanatical faith of a man who believes down to the marrow that he is the last thing standing between his people and the fire that took everything from him. My lord, I only ever sought to heal, and that he breathed is exactly why you have to die. He lunged. His hands closed around her throat, and she felt the terrible healed strength she had given him back with her own power, now crushing the breath out of her. She screamed, the sound tore out high and thin and bounced off the round stone walls. She clawed at his wrists. There was nowhere to go. The wall behind her. His hands on her throat. The dark closing in at the edges of her sight. And then the world exploded. The door came off its hinges. The king tore into the chamber, his golden eyes blazing, and the roar that came out of him shook grit from the ceiling and made every guard in the room flinch back a step. Let her go. Rogar's hands opened. Maren dropped gasping, sliding down the wall, air sawing back into her burning throat. But the beta's face showed no fear, no remorse, only that terrible certainty. She's poison, nephew. She'll be the death of all of us if we let her keep drawing breath. I told you. The king's voice had dropped to something quiet and lethal. She stays. And I told you that it is impossible. Rogar's composure finally broke apart. Look at what she's done to you. Look how weak you've become. Our enemies will smell it on you, like blood in water. Since when does the wolf who conquered the North Moon over an omega like some lovesick boy? The words hung in the cold air, and Maren's cheeks burned with shame, and with something worse than shame. Because they weren't only cruel. They named a thing she had thought was hers alone. A thing she had hidden even from herself most nights. You've lost sight of who you are, the king said. This has gone too far. Too far. Rogar laughed, and it was an awful, hollow sound. I raised you from the ashes, boy. I pulled you out of the fire when your parents' softness would have let you burn with the rest of them. I made you strong. I made you king. And this is how you repay me." His hand moved to his belt and drew a dagger. Its blade caught the torchlight with an oily wrong sheen that Maren knew that she would know anywhere now in her sleep for the rest of her life. Poison. The same silver poison she had spent a night on her knees, pulling out of his own veins. "If you won't be the king I made you to be," Rogar said, and there was something almost like grief in it, "then perhaps it is time for a new one." He struck without warning. The blade flashed for the king's heart. But the king was faster. His hand snapped up, caught his uncle's wrist, and twisted until the dagger rang against the stone floor. And then it began. Uncle and nephew. Teacher and student. The man who had pulled a boy from a burning pack, and the boy that man had raised into a king, locked together in the round stone room, and it was a terrible thing to watch. They knew each other's every move, every feint. Rogar had taught him all of them. But the king had youth and reach, and a fury that had been building for longer than either of them knew. He should have won it clean. Except the guards came off the walls. "For the true Alpha," one shouted, his sword singing. "For strength," cried another, his blade seeking the king's spine. 5 of them, 5 against 1, and the king turned into something out of a nightmare. Claws tearing through armor, throwing grown warriors across the room like they weighed nothing. But there were too many, and they kept coming, and Maren watched in helpless horror as a blade found his shoulder. Then another opened his side. He staggered. He did not fall. His golden eyes still burned, fierce and beautiful, and she knew it with a sick certainty, losing. And behind him, rising up out of the chaos, Rogar. The poisoned dagger back in his hand, gleaming. "Look out!" she screamed. Too late. The blade slid between the king's ribs into the gap in his armor, precise as a key finding a lock. His eyes went wide, and Maren felt the scream die in her own throat. "I'm sorry," Rogar whispered, and his voice broke on it. Actually broke. "I'm sorry it had to end this way. But I won't watch you unmake everything we built." The king looked up at him, blood at his lips. And for one held moment, uncle and nephew simply stared at each other across the small, terrible distance, the man who'd raised him, and the man who was killing him. And then quietly, the king spoke. "There's something you should know, before this ends." He drew a breath that rattled. "My mother told me about you, at the very end, when the fire was already in the walls." Rogar went still. "She told me who opened the gate that night." The king's golden eyes held his. "Who let the killers in? Who traded my whole pack for a chance to raise a boy hard enough to survive the world you were building?" The blood drained from Rogar's face. "It was you." It was not a question. "You didn't pull me from the fire, uncle. You lit it. You murdered my mother and my father, and every soul I loved, and then you carried me out of the ashes and called it rescue. And you have spent 30 years teaching me to be grateful for it." "I saved you." Rogar's voice cracked. "They were weak. They would have gotten you killed. I made you into something that could survive. You made me into a cage." The king's claws extended with a sound like steel drawn over stone. "So did I." And his hand punched through his uncle's chest in one clean, final motion. Rogar's pale eyes went wide, then empty. He toppled backward, and his body hit the stone floor with a sound. Maren felt in her own bones, hollow and final, and 30 years too long in coming. The king swayed. The strength that last blow had cost him drained out of him all at once, and the gray was already climbing up under his skin, The same gray she had watched creep over his uncle by the stream. His eyes rolled back, and he pitched forward straight into Marin's waiting arms. She caught him. Of course she caught him. She would always catch him. "No," she whispered, and her hands were already glowing. "No, not like this. You do not get to save me, and then die in my arms, do you hear me? You don't." They carried him up to his chambers. A ragged procession of terrified servants and the few loyal guards who hadn't turned moving fast through the dark halls. Marin never let go of his hand. Not on the stairs. Not for one step. Her healing light poured into him the whole way, and word ran ahead of them, through the fortress, like fire through dry grass. Rogar is dead. The king is dying. Everything is coming apart. But Marin had eyes for one thing only: the shallow rise and fall of his chest, the gray spreading like frost across a window pane. They laid him on the great bed, and she knelt beside it and pressed her hands to the wound over his heart and poured everything she had into his failing body. The silver fought her. Moon above, how it fought her. It resisted her light the way acid eats through silk drop by stubborn drop. Hours passed. Servants came and went, in whispers bringing food she didn't touch, and water she barely wet her lips with. Corin stood at the door like a stone, his scarred face gray with worry. But Marin never moved, never stopped, never once let go of the fight. Because she loved him. Not the Alpha King, with his cold voice and his conqueror's reputation. The man underneath. The one who carried a starving stranger up a mountain when she was too weak to walk. The one who sat vigil through the night beside her, while she saved the life of a man who'd sworn to end hers. She loved his strength, and she loved the gentleness he'd spent 30 years pretending not to have. She loved the way he looked at her, as if she were something precious, as if she were a person and not a price. And she was losing him. "Please," she whispered, and the tears ran down her face and fell onto his gray skin. "Please don't leave me. I need you. This whole broken kingdom needs you. But I need you most of all, and I know I have no right. Right, and I don't care, just stay. Please stay." His breathing hitched, went shallower. "Marin." His lips moved without sound, shaping her name over and over, like a prayer, like the last thing a drowning man reaches for. His eyes did not open. He was somewhere far down, somewhere between the living and the dead. "I'm here," she breathed, leaning close. "I'm right here. I won't leave you." And she made a choice. She reached past the last of her healing light down into the deeper thing beneath it. Her own life. The very core of her. And she poured that into him too, her own flame guttering as she fed it into his, a wild and desperate gamble that would either drag him back into the world or take them both down into the dark together. The poison broke. All at once, like a dam giving way, her light flooded through him and washed the silver out. The gray drained from his skin. His breathing deepened, steadied, filled, and color came back into his ashen face, warm and living and real. Marin collapsed sideways onto the bed beside him. Spent, hollowed out, barely a candle flame of herself left flickering. But he was alive. Against everything. Against all of it. He was alive. Dawn was breaking pale gold through the tall windows when his eyes finally opened. For a moment only stared at the ceiling. Lost. Then his gaze moved and found her face on the pillow beside his own. and something in his own face broke open. Maren. And this time his voice was clear, and strong, and hers. "I'm sorry," she said at once, because she could not help it. "This is all my fault. If I'd only stayed in my place, if I'd never—" "Stop." His hand found hers on the blanket between them. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare. Take his choices onto yourself. But I brought division into your pack, between you and your own family. You brought healing." He struggled up onto one elbow, wincing. "And you've had it backwards this whole time. So have I. For 30 years. His golden eyes searched her face. "I've been watching you, since I came back. Every day. I couldn't speak to you, because if I'd let myself say one word, I'd have said all of them, and I wasn't ready. But I watched. I saw what you did to my people while I was gone." The servants smile now. The children laugh. His thumb moved across her knuckles slow. "You were right. About all of it. Suffering for its own sake was never strength. It was just fear wearing a crown. My uncle clung to our pain because he thought it was the only thing keeping us safe. And I believed him. Because I was a boy who watched his family burn, and I was terrified." "You're not afraid now," she whispered. "I was terrified for 30 years, he admitted, of being weak, of making the soft mistakes that got my parents killed. But I had it wrong the whole time." His free hand rose and cupped her cheek, and she leaned into it before she could think better of it. "Real strength isn't fighting through a wound you could have healed. It's choosing to heal at all. To build instead of break. You knew that the day they dragged you onto that platform. It took me my whole life to learn it, and you taught it to me without saying a single word." "My lord," she whispered, and her cheeks were wet again. "Alaric," he said gently. "My name is Alaric, and I would very much like to hear you say it." The intimacy of it stole the breath right out of her. "Alaric," she managed. Something eased in his whole body at the sound. "Thank you," he whispered, "for saving me, for saving all of us, for walking into the coldest place in the world and refusing every single day to let it make you cold, too." He drew her in, careful of his healing side, his arms folding around her with a tenderness that undid the last of her. "My fierce little healer, my heart." And when his lips found hers, the kiss was soft, reverent, as if he were afraid she might break beneath it or vanish or turn out after all. To have been a thing he only dreamed in the fever. But when she melted into him, when her hand slid up into his dark hair and held on, he deepened it with a quiet desperation that spoke of a man who had come within one heartbeat of losing everything that had ever mattered, and did not intend to lose it now. Spring came to the fortress, and it brought change with it. Where the training grounds had been bare dirt gardens grew now the green rows of healing herbs comfrey and yarrow and willow bark, tended by hands that had once known only the sword. The clash of weapons still rang through the yards at dawn. But now it came braided with something else. Laughter, encouragement, a trainer calling out not to break a recruit, but to lift him. Warriors who had once trained only to dominate, now trained to defend. And somewhere along the way, they had learned the oldest truth there is, that the truest strength a person owns is not measured in how many they can bring down, but in how many they can lift up and stand between and protect. Alaric moved through his pack like a wolf remade. His power had not shrunk. If anything, it had grown deeper and quieter and surer. But now it was tempered with mercy. Where once the young wolves had flinched from his shadow, now they sought him out, because they had learned that in his counsel they would find both strength and gentleness. and that the two had never been enemies at all. The fortress itself seemed to breathe easier, music from the great hall where there had been only silence. Children underfoot in corridors that had echoed with harsh commands. Even the black stone seemed to sit warmer in the light, as though the change that had moved through these people had soaked down into the very bones of the mountain. And on the night of the full moon, when the whole pack gathered in the courtyard under that great silver eye, Alaric took Marin's hand before all of them. The mighty king, who had once thought kindness was weakness, looked at her now with no shield left on his face at all. Only devotion plain as daylight for the whole pack to see. "You came to us in chains," he said, and his deep voice carried to the farthest wall. "Bought and sold, called worthless, called weak." He lifted her hand and pressed it to his heart. "And you freed every soul in this fortress. You taught us that strength was never about how many we could defeat. It was always about how many we could protect. You didn't only heal our wounds." His voice dropped, and everyone leaned in to catch it. "You healed our hearts, under the silver light of the moon." He bent his head and marked her as his mate, the gentle press of his teeth. A vow older than any kingdom, a promise of a love with no end to it. And their wolves ran out together into the moonlight. Black and silver, strength and mercy, two halves of one whole running the mountain paths side by side. At last the conqueror, who had learned to be gentle, and the healer who had never once in all her suffering learned to be cruel. She had come up that mountain, a girl worth 15 silver to a cruel man haggling over grain. She left it a queen, but that was never the miracle of it. Not really. The miracle was simpler, and it was this, that a woman with nothing, no name, no rank, no power, no one in all the world to speak for her, had walked into the coldest kingdom under the moon, and with nothing but the stubborn kindness of her own 2 hands, had thawed it all the way to spring. Because that is what mercy does in the end. It does not break the cold, it outlasts it.